welcome to the first episode of Nexty Talks, a podcast brought to you by Nexty Sports Management. We're extremely excited to start this project, and I could not be more thankful and honored to have as my first guest multi-champion Jeff Larentowicz. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks for stopping by and being here with us.
No problem. I'm honored to be the first.
Yeah, I couldn't think about anyone better to start this project, as we are going to bring content for everybody here in this podcast in relation to sportive development. If you are a youth athlete, if you are a collegiate athlete, if you're a professional athlete, I'm sure you're going to get some good information and good content when it comes up to the topics and everything we're going to talk about here. Of course, you're a soccer player. We're going to be very much on a soccer side of things. But before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Leo de Souza. I am also a soccer professional. I am a coach, a director of coaching. I'm originally from Brazil and started my career here in the United States back in 2011. And I'm very blessed to be able to work with my sport in this country and in this market that it's growing a lot. And we're going to talk about it, how much it changed since you started it to now. So to get the ball rolling, to get things started, why don't you take us to the young Jeff as a youth player? Where were you born? Where are you from? And how was your introduction to the sport and youth club career? How did everything go?
Yeah. Well, I was born in California, LA, Pasadena. My parents were living out there, although both of my parents are from Philadelphia. They moved out there for my mom's job. So I was born there. And then we moved back to Philadelphia when I was 2. So, as a kid, I was an athlete. I loved sports. I played every sport. My dad was an athlete. He ran track, cross country in college. His dad was an athlete, so kind of ran in the family. But no one played soccer until my sister. Okay. And she's 4 years older than me, Laura, and she started playing as a kid, and it was the 80s, and everyone was just kind of throwing their kids in soccer. And
was there already a debate back then with the football and the hitting and the concussions and all of that?
No, not at all. And in fact, I played football as a kid too. So
Nice.
When I was in middle school, 6th, 7th grade, I played football. Pads and all. Now they have, flag football and stuff like that's really popular. But I played every sport as a kid, and just as I grew up, it became clearer and clearer that soccer was the one that I wanted to do.
What was your youth club? Which one?
I played when I was very young for a club called Westchester United.
Okay. That's in California, or?
No, that's outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
And then when I reached under 15, I played for a club called FC Delco.
How was the structure of the youth soccer in the area then? Of course, right now we're living this moment in the youth game in which we have multiple leagues, we have multiple branches and private leagues parallel with the U.S. soccer and U.S. youth soccer.
Yeah.
How was the structure back then?
It was a lot simpler. There were so few acronyms out there.
Yeah.
USYSE, CNL, all of that stuff. MLS next, none of that really existed. It was USYSA. I was part of EPYSA, Eastern Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
State Cup was everything.
Yeah.
Getting to regionals was like getting on ESPN basically, and then if you got to nationals, you were a local celebrity. So
Nice.
it was about state cups, your fall league, your spring league, and some tournaments in the summer. That was kind of how it went.
When was the moment of the light bulb hit off, and you're like, okay, I think I can do this for real. I think I can take this as a professional career. Like, was it? Do you recall going back home and saying, you know what? I think this is it. It was something gradual. It was
as a professional career. I mean, I've made the joke before. I didn't think I'd be a professional until my third year as a professional. But no, I mean, I played all sports as a kid. I played basketball through college. I played I was actually on the golf team basketball through high school. I was on the golf team in high school, played baseball, played football, I played everything. And then once I got to college, I was fortunate enough to be recruited by a really good coach and a really good school. And my junior year, I was named All-American, and that was pretty cool. And after my junior year, that coach, his name's Mike Noonan, I was at Brown University, he sent me to Sweden, where he played when he finished college. He still had contacts there. And he said, I just want you should go check out the pro environment. Yeah. After my sophomore year, I went and trained with the Revolution because Brown is in New England, so I was
And what time are you talking about there? About 2000s, early 2000s?
Yeah, so my years at Brown were, my first fall season was 2001. I graduated 2005.
Okay.
So 01, 2, 3, 4 were the seasons. So after 2002, so the summer of 2003, I trained with the Revolution. Summer of 2004, I went to Malmo, Sweden.
Okay.
And I spent 6 weeks there.
Ibrahimovic.
That was his
Academy.
club.
Yeah.
You're right. And so that wasn't long after he had left. He went from Malmo to Ajax.
That's
So
right.
he was a recently departed legend of that club. But I got to see it a little bit, be a part of that culture, getting a sense of what it would be like to play a sport for a living.
Yep.
I went to college. I played sports as a way to get me into the best school possible.
Sure.
That was how I
That was the
viewed it.
main, and I would say that back in the day, especially with soccer, it was the main. I would say it was the main goal for most of the families that would enroll players within, their kids within the game, right? Because a lot of people don't know, but the World Cup of 1994 here in the U.S. was actually the first. U.S. was the only host country that hosted a World Cup without a professional league.
Mhm.
Right, the MLS only started in '96, almost 2 years after, and the U.S. soccer had promised FIFA that they would put a
Right.
professional league together. So that was not quite a professional pathway, right?
No, there wasn't, and obviously everyone knows the history of like pro soccer in the U.S. Leagues come and go. The
Mhm.
indoor league was very popular. I remember going to Baltimore Blast games when I was a kid.
Yep.
Philadelphia Kicks were big even through the early 2000s.
And when you mean indoor, was that format that the ball wouldn't get out and
Yeah, like
bounce off the
hockey
wall
rink.
like hockey rink?
Yeah, exactly. 5v5 plus a goalkeeper.
Sure.
I grew up playing that. I loved that game. But yeah, I mean, 94 World Cup was pivotal. I remember watching all of Euro 96. And during those times, it was just like, that was the seed, It was
Yeah.
like, wow, this is the sport I love. I remember watching Euro 96 games and then putting my cleats on and going straight outside. So, yeah, I mean, those tournaments were big. But you're right. I mean, youth players, young players. I looked up to high school players.
Yep.
Playing in high school was massive. And then if you got to play in college, you were, like I said, you were almost like a celebrity.
How was that? And hence it's very different now, with so many services and different ways that college coaches and recruiters are using to spot talent. But how was that transition for you, from the high school game, from the youth club high school game, to being, to finding your school and showcasing your skills?
Well, it was difficult. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that because what I do now is I work for an analytics company that does a lot of our work through video and helps
Sure.
kids get recruited. But back then it was just, you hope somebody walked by your field. Or you write a letter and say, I'll be at such and such field or this tournament, come and see me play. This is the date and time of my game, location. And I got recruited by chance.
Yep.
And the coach was there looking for someone else and saw me. And that's just kind of how it goes, or how it went, I guess, back then. But the transition was tough. I was young for my grade. So when I got to college and I was...
And I'm sorry to cut you off, but there's also something that is different from then to now, is now we use the full birth year, right? Instead of graduation, instead of school year.
Right.
So when you mentioned, like I was young, or something, like we even have right now, if you're recruiting in a 2004 born player, you might have those players born in January. You might have those players born in November, December. That it's almost 1 year apart.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, when you think about that, you think about birth cutoffs, and you think about relative age effect and all those things. And obviously, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell talked about players in the NHL where they were born one quarter of the year. I was born in August, and so for my grade, I was extremely young.
Okay.
I was an active little kid, and my mom was like, you
gotta go.
You gotta go.
You gotta get out of this house.
And so I was very, very young for my grade, but the cutoff for youth soccer used to be August 1st. So I was extremely old for my age group. And so when I went and played for my high school team, it was really tough. When I went and played with my club team, I was more mature. I was leader on the team. I was one of the better players. And so I kind of got a taste of both worlds. It wasn't like I was always the oldest and always the best. I got beat up a lot at school in terms of like on the court, on the field. But yeah, it's changed so much now. And when I got to college, being a young person for the school year, I was probably the youngest guy on my college team at just turning 18, playing against 22-year-olds. I mean, I remember games my freshman year just getting absolutely manhandled. So the transition
couldn't play.
Yeah, the transition was tough.
Yeah. So moving forward, when you get your draft, it wasn't as smooth as of the draft, right? It looks like it was a couple of rounds until you got selected.
Yeah.
And how was that experience for you? And when how was the process of making the decision? Okay, I'm going to declare myself, and I'm gonna really pursue this. Once again, putting in perspective, the MLS is extremely different from what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's lots that goes into that, but my coach again was very plugged into that pathway. Had many connections at the professional level. MLS was established for almost 10 years at that point. And so after I told you my junior year I was named All-American, my senior year I was named All-American again. Okay. And so my coach was basically like, well, you should apply for the combine. And so I did, and I got in, and I went to the combine, and it was a mess. It was 4 days in LA. It rained the whole time. And you've got 60 or 80 seniors from around the country, or even younger. I remember Brad Guzan was there, even though he was a couple of years behind me in school. But and they're trying to show their best, and it's raining, and you've got a bunch of agents swirling, and you have the draft coming up, and it was tough. I didn't perform well. I was nervous. It was difficult. And so then the draft came. People telling me certain things when I'd be drafted, and it never really happened. So they used to have two drafts. One was the super draft, one was the supplemental draft. Each were 4 rounds. And I was drafted in the 4th round of the second draft, so essentially the 8th round. And by the New England Revolution.
The rest.
Yeah, so I think I was picked 45 in that draft, and there were 48. So I was almost not picked. Yeah. And
how is and I would say that at the same time that you'd be excited about being selected, it will take a toll on you to say, okay, am I they're just taking me for taking it, just composing the group. How do we change that mindset to become a U.S. men's national team player?
It took a long time.
Yeah.
It took a really long time. And it wasn't because I'd expected to be drafted sooner, and then I was bitter or whatever. It was the fact that when I got there, everyone was much better than I was.
Okay.
Plain and simple. And the mindset from college, where it's all for one for all, you get into a pro locker room and nobody is trying to help you at all. And a goal you score is a goal your teammate doesn't score, which means you might eat better than him, essentially.
Yep.
And that dog-eat-dog mentality was difficult to struggle in because no one's really looking out for you. So it took me a long time. I played 1 minute my first year, and then my second year I played a bit more. But you mentioned okay, are they just taking me to make up numbers? And they essentially were, because in that year, 2005, the league expanded and they created expanded, first of all, there were 2 new teams, but they also created what was called the Reserve League,
Okay.
which, in pro soccer is basically, the Reserve League is...
Guys are not getting minutes with the first team, or not getting listed. Back then they have the 18 list.
Exactly. So I played with the reserves that entire year, and but since the league knew they had to field teams to play this 12-game season in the Reserve League, they had to expand rosters.
Okay.
And so when the rosters got expanded, I was basically given that opportunity.
That's good takeaways from me there. Of course, the humbleness to assume that there are some other folks there that are better than me, and finding the drive to overcome that. That's amazing. I feel that things are so flashy these days that some of those players, now you have MLS Next, you have ECNO, you have National League, you have other leagues that they're constantly being showcased. And I feel that we're losing a little bit of that humbleness sometimes. Those kids just want to go in and, I'm a star, here I am, give it to me, and it's not, it's earned.
It's true. It's true. I mean, a lot of youth sports now, they talk about professionalization, which on one hand is great. Proper training and good coaches and good facilities is good for the game and it's good for the player. Professionalization of youth soccer does not mean you're a professional soccer player. And I've watched MLS Next. I've watched all of the different levels, and it's still youth soccer. And
that's right.
Players need to know that. Parents need to know that. And I think that just because you wear the same jersey as Joseph Martinez doesn't mean you've made it.
And play with the same soccer ball and have the data analytics and all of that.
It doesn't matter. You're not there yet.
Yeah. That's a good reality check, to be very honest. Well, career with Revs, and how did that progress? And I feel so. When it was right after the Revs when Chicago Fire came along, or Colorado first and then Chicago? Yeah,
I played 5 years in New England, and then I went to Colorado. So it was great in New England. It was trial by fire. It was tough love. It was dog eat dog.
The weather,
like I said.
Playing.
Yeah,
outside. Where they used to play?
The Revs were always in Gillette when I was...
Okay.
And before they turfed it, it was grass, and Bill Belichick, the famous coach of the Patriots, he never wanted the soccer team out there, and once the fall came around, football players destroyed the grass field, and our field was really bad. So it was difficult, but at the same time, I think we had one of the best teams in MLS history, just as far as Steve Nicol, Paul Mariner, the coaches there, recruiting the best talent. I think that they just nailed it in the draft every year. And I'm not talking about me, but all the other guys that they had. And I was surrounded by good players. So I played 5 years there. We went to 3 MLS Cups. It was great. And I played out my contract and got traded to Colorado.
Okay.
2010.
And that's when the first MLS Cup title came along.
Yeah, so I lost 3 with New England. 3 in a row, my first 3 seasons. 2008, 2009, I didn't go. We went to the playoffs, but we didn't go to the Cup. And then 2010, I got traded to Colorado, and we went to MLS Cup, and we won that year.
That's awesome. Well, last night I tossed and turned because I knew we had this first episode to record, and we started, and I'm nervous and thinking about it, what to ask, what to do, what's going to happen. How is the mental state of someone about to step into the field to play an MLS Cup game? How do you cope with that anxiety? How do you cope? Because that can be an MLS Cup game. It can be a State Cup final. It can be a State Cup semis. I've had players that broken down in tears because we're behind 2 goals in mid of first half.
Yeah.
How do you cope? How do you manage?
Well, I think that N'Golo Kante, he's a player for Chelsea, a French national team player, and I saw him give an interview once, and he was talking about, somebody said, what was it like to play in front of 90,000 people?
Yeah.
And he said, well, it's not hard, because I played in front of 5, and then I played in front of 100, and then I played in front of 1,000, and you just slowly build up toward
Gradually.
it. Yeah, you gradually build toward it. And so I think you get better at it. But I can tell you this, I played hundreds of pro games, and I was nervous before every single one of them.
Yeah.
Every single one. There wasn't a single one I wasn't nervous for. And that's just fear of failure, that's fear of making a mistake, that's fear of the opponent, whatever it is. I always had that. And for me, the hardest thing was managing the day of the game until the whistle blew. And 2 seconds
rolling.
Yeah, 2 seconds into the game, I was at home, and all the other things were gone.
Yeah.
And it was second nature. And I think the thing is that second nature is something that gets put in you by practice, by repetition, by focus during the week, and knowing that what you're doing is building towards something, and so that when the game starts, it just clicks in. And so, like I said, the hardest part was managing my emotions before the
Prior
game.
to it, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a good piece of Andrea Pirlo's book, the I Think Before I Play.
Yeah.
So that was a good one, and then a good passage of it says that before the 2006 World Cup final, I played PlayStation, I drank a glass of wine, and I went to sleep, and I'm like,
Yeah.
how is that possible? And then they ended up that game that Zidane hit Materazzi with the head. I feel that's another good lesson for youth players. We are so much, once again, the level of noise, it's higher than it's ever been with social media, with everything else that surrounds us these days. It's easy for you to lose your focus and think about the things that will calm you down, put you in a path that you can go out there and perform. For the soccer, it's you can put more hours than your opponent, you can study more footage than your opponent, you can analyze more of your game, you can train harder, the other team can still come up with a win. It's a game that takes everything from you, but doesn't really promise you anything.
Yeah.
Colorado goes, and then who comes? LA?
Chicago.
Fine. That's right.
Yeah. So
how was that transition, and how is it transitioning from, and that's also things that youth players don't listen or don't hear too much. How is transitioning from one city to the other, from one locker room to the other, different coach, different city, taking your family up whenever you're at a point that you have your significant other and kids. How is that transition from Colorado to Chicago, and how these transitions go?
difficult, extremely, because when you look at it on paper, it's a clean break, but you don't realize between those two things there's this massive emotional bridge you have to cross. I said in New England I played out my contract. I love New England. They drafted me. They basically,
gave it a chance.
Yeah, they gave me my opportunity, but then also didn't turn their back on me and developed me. And then I had to tell them I was leaving because when it came to contract time, I didn't feel like they valued me in the right way. And it was difficult walking into the coach, Steve Nicol, and say, I'm not coming back. And then in MLS, if you get traded, you don't have a say. And it's true in almost all North American sports, at least for most of the players.
Sure.
And so I got traded, and I had no choice, and it was Colorado. And then I went. I was single at the time. When I left Colorado, I had met my now wife, and it was the first time I was bringing somebody with me. And the end of my time in Colorado wasn't very easy because that year I had signed an extension, and so that's basically the club saying, I want you here, and then everything fell apart, and they basically, it was a falling out with the coach, and it was like, well, you're out of here. And so you go from signing an extension, 6 months later you're leaving, unexpectedly, and with a fiance in tow. It's like, that's tough.
So you have essentially you have your technical relationship, let's put it this way, which is your relationship with your coaching staff and with the head coach and everyone else involved. And you have your relationship with the, let's say, with the front office, right? With folks that negotiate contracts and all of that. And usually, normally you have your agent with you as a part of this negotiations with the office piece.
Sure.
Is that a fair analysis? Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the front office, whether they call them the GM or technical
Sure.
director or whatever it is, builds the team, and the coaches the team.
Mhm.
And sometimes there's good synergy between those two.
Sometimes.
Sometimes there's not.
That's right.
And even my exit,
Which can trickle down to players, of course.
yeah, and my exit from Colorado was 3 people in a room: the player, the coach, and the front office member, and they were all saying different things. One saying leave, one saying fine, I'll leave, the other one saying wait, don't leave.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a bit of a merry-go-round. So, yeah, it's not as easy as people think. Yeah, it can be really tough, and that was one of the toughest, exits for me. And then I ended up going to Chicago, where during my time in New England, our biggest rival was Chicago.
Okay.
And they didn't forget.
Oh, wow.
And I showed up, and they weren't very happy that I was showing up.
Little boom.
Yeah,
a little noise.
Yeah, more than a little, for sure. Yeah.
So it wasn't an easy exit, and it wasn't an easy entry.
Not at all.
How do we turn things around?
Well, unfortunately, in Chicago, I couldn't say that we ever turned it around. Those were 3 of the poorest years of my career. Our first year, we just missed the playoffs. My second year, we broke the record for ties in a season with 17. And my third year, we were the worst team in the league. And I was the captain for a lot of it, and it was exceptionally hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really hard.
And then, did you finish your contract? Were you back to the office and say, okay, this is not working for me anymore? How did the next chapter come along?
Yeah, so that contract ended, and in MLS you have what's called an option, and so on paper it looks like you have a 4-year deal, but essentially between the years it's called an option. The option is a decision for the front office to sign you or not. And I believe I had an option at the end of that was 2015. I believe I had an option and they didn't pick it up, and so I was a member of the MLS Players Association, and that year was the very first time a player of any age, caliber, whatever, got free agency, which means they had the ability to decide where they wanted to
And
go.
we're talking 2016. 2016. Okay.
Yeah, so I'd been in the league for 11 years. The league was 20 years old, and that was the first time. And you had to be, I think it was either 28 years old or 30 years old. I forget because the rules changed, and have played 10 years in the league to get free agency.
So we're going to pause here in terms of your journey, because we're still going to talk about LA, we're still going to talk about Atlanta United. Of course, we're recording this podcast from Atlanta. And you're an absolute legend here, as you are for the league and for the sport in the U.S. But let's pause there, and since you mentioned the Player Association, and this is definitely something that I would like to, that I'm extremely interested in hearing from you, how you've developed this leadership personality across your career. You started to lead your teammates, locker room, and all of that. If you ask 10 players and say, do you want to deal with politics and agreements, and I would say 9 out of 10 sports players would say, I want to run as far away as I can from that.
Yeah.
Just to give it a little bit of context, so MLS is an entity, right? It's a private league. And the MLS has a relationship with the athletes via something that we call collective bargaining agreement, CBA, which is, I believe, is pretty standard across NFL, NBA.
Yeah, all North America.
North America, yeah, it's the way that the sports here in the U.S. are governed, let's put it this way. The CBA is an agreement between the entity, the league, and the Players Association.
Correct.
and you were part of the player association part of it.
Right.
When did that start? What sparked your interest? Challenges you faced? Take us through that journey a little bit.
Yeah, so the MLSPA used to be called the union, the Players
Mhm.
Union. Now it's called the Players Association, but it started in 2003. Again, my first season was 2005. And I think it was 2004 or 2005 was the first year that Major League Soccer players were guaranteed medical rights. And
Okay.
that was kind of the first thing that the Players Union did. I got involved because Bob Foose, who is still the executive director and has been since day one, went
Of the association of
yeah
MLS
of,
Pro.
of the MLSPA.
Mhm.
He went to Brown University,
Okay.
and that's where I went. And every year at the beginning of the year, they would come and they'd meet with every team face to face and say, "Hey, this is who we are. This is what we do," and walk us through the issues of the day, and reach out if you need any help. And so since we had gone to the same school, I said, strike up a relationship with this guy.
Mhm.
I was on the smallest contract possible. I had absolutely no rights. I couldn't really understand it. I definitely felt like in a locker room where everyone's doing the same job, how can the wages be so different?
So when you say medical rights, you didn't have medical rights. Like if you get injured, for example, you wouldn't get paid.
No medical coverage.
Oh,
yeah.
coverage.
And
Okay.
and you
Like
could
okay.
and you could be released at any point
Okay.
in the year. Like contracts were not guaranteed.
Okay.
There were lots of rules, and the one that really kind of stuck out to me was I had my first contract, and when you play out your deal, you'd think, okay, my contract expired, and
Okay.
therefore I should have autonomy. I should be allowed to do what I choose.
Mhm.
Maybe not choose my team, but you shouldn't be able to hold my rights and then gain value from me if it's expired. And that wasn't true at the time. And so my first contract in New England expired, and yet they still held my rights. They traded me to Colorado, and they were compensated. And,
Okay.
that to me just didn't really make sense. And that was the big issue for me in the beginning. And
Kind of lit up a little bit of fire. They were like, I want to know more about this. I want to get.
well, yeah, the question is, okay, now I understand contracts. This is kind of the first time I've been introduced to a world of contracts. Contract is my protection.
Mhm.
It's my employment. And there are a lot of ins and outs to how we've gotten there. And, well, wait a second, I didn't realize that it's collectively bargained. So how do we make it better for the players?
everyone.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what a union is. Whether you're a bricklayer or a teamster or
Mhm.
whatever, it's the power of the workers can come together and make working conditions better. And so it was the same in pro soccer. And like you said, 9 out of 10. I think it's probably more like 99 out of 100.
Would not.
Players wouldn't
want to
have
do with
wouldn't
it.
have interest in that. And I did. I felt like I needed something off the field. I felt like the issues hit close to home.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just naturally kind of gravitated toward that.
Okay. And how long did you stay with this process or negotiating and assisting with negotiation? Did you get any backlash because of it?
Oh.
Did it affect your? So how did that go?
It's impossible. Yeah, it's crazy because I started as a team, like assistant rep. I remember Jay Heaps was our team rep, and Marshall Leonard. Those are names for any MLSers out there will know those guys.
Mhm.
I was kind of their assistant from the first year, 2005, and then I became the team rep probably 2007 or 8, and then so each team back then elects a representative.
Okay.
So
you
someone
have-
that goes and goes to the meetings, bargains for the team, organizes meetings within the team to find out where they are, essentially. Where do you stand on this? Where do you stand on that? Things we were fighting for were meals before and after training, per diem, what does the travel experience look like, relocation expenses. I mean, we were back then. It was like let's just get the basics down,
Yep.
and then also guaranteed contracts and things like that. And so your rep would speak to your team and get an idea of where everybody was. Back then the league had 12 teams, now it's 28. Yeah.
St. Louis about to come.
Yeah, it's gonna continue to expand. And so above the reps, elected by the reps, was the executive board. And the executive board used to be 5 players. And my first year on the executive board was, I believe, 2013 or 14, and I stayed on the board for 7 or 8 years until the end of my career.
Okay.
So the executive board is basically the one that oversees the employees of the PA. So the executive director, the general counsel, the COO, all of the player liaisons that work for the team. But then they also drive the policy and drive basically the direction of the league from the player side.
For example, points, they're included in a CBA. Salary cap, target allocation money, in relation to a player day-to-day activity. What would you say? So how is it now in terms of the meals and the travel? Like how did that progress now?
Oh, well, exponentially. Like I said, I mean, one of the main things and one of the things I'm most proud of is Major League Soccer is the first North American sport to gain free agency without a work stoppage.
Okay.
And a work stoppage is essentially a strike. And so collective bargaining agreements, at least in our league, they came around every 5 years. And essentially, it's like you said, it's a contract between the players and the ownership.
Okay.
MLS, as you said, is a single entity. It's a group of governors who are the owners of the team, and they all operate under one company, which is Major League Soccer, and they were at the other end of the table. So every 5 years, the two sides come together and agree on the laws that will govern the league. And so I went through 4 separate CBA negotiations, and each one ticked off different things off the list in terms
a little bit each time. Increasingly better.
Yeah, guaranteed contracts, and then we created something that was called the re-entry draft, which dealt with the issue of playing out your contracts and not having the team retain your rights. After the re-entry draft was free agency, and then in one of the last ones was charter flights, so travel. But all along, like you said, I mean, salary cap is a huge one. Minimum salary is a huge one. So all of that gets rolled into the CBA. I think the CBA is usually 29 articles. So you think like 29 different things, main laws that govern the league, and then all the stipulations beneath each.
And for anyone out there that wants to have access to this document, you have MLSPA.com, is that right?
I believe it's MLSplayers.org.
Or if they, a simple search would
absolutely. All the information is there. You can find the CBA online. All the salary information and the rules of the league are online as well.
I feel that's important for youth players to take, and I know those kids might not have the interest to read the full, like a full collective bargaining agreement back to front, but at least some of the points it's interesting because as we're talking here offline, the homegrown contract is one specific salary amount, right? The first, after you get drafted through the super draft, you have your first rookie contract, which is also a specific amount. So it's good for players to start understanding what they're trying to get to, what they're trying to achieve, so they can get the most ready possible for that level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the league has a bunch of different salary levels and rules around how rosters are structured. You have 20 senior roster spots, you have 4 roster spots after that, and then you have 4 supplemental spots after that. So if you're a GM and you're building a team, you have to build within those parameters. You have a set budget that you have to build within. Then you have, as you said, targeted allocation money, which sits on top of that. You have homegrown rules, which if you're a homegrown player, you don't count against the cap, and on and on and on. It's a tangled web that they've created through years and years of developing new rules. But if you're a player going in, and I fell victim to it, you should know you should know the rules. You should know where you stand, and
What's
it's
going on,
difficult. It's difficult to do it on your own. Trusting an agent is difficult as well because they have their own vested interests in what you do and what you sign. But for example, I signed my first contract with New England. It was a 4-year deal, but a 1 + 1 + 1 + 1.
Okay.
So between each season was that option that I talked about.
Okay.
And I played that first season it was called supplemental. It was the minimum salary of the league. It was called, I'm blanking on the name. But it was developmental salary.
So that was like your roster status, let's put it this way.
Yeah, I was a developmental player.
Okay.
And there were 2 levels of developmental. There was developmental, and then there was senior developmental.
Okay.
Developmental was $12,000 a year. Senior developmental was $16,500 a year.
Wow.
And so I played out the first year, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going to happen. I played 1 minute. I traveled a lot with the team. I performed with the reserve team, yada, yada, yada. And at the end of the year, they said, we want to have you back. And I said, great. And I didn't have an agent because I wasn't making enough money to pay an agent, and I just didn't feel like it was necessary, but I was a fool. And they said, well, we'd like to re-sign you. I said, great. And they didn't say we'd like to pick up your option. They said we'd like to re-sign you. And I didn't understand the difference necessarily. And so instead of being on a 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 4-year deal, that first year passed, and I signed a new 4-year deal. So I went from being able to kind of make a choice in 4 years to having to make a choice in 5. And so, yeah, as a new player coming in, there are so many rules and there's lots of ins and outs that when you're faced with a contract like I was, or faced with your option getting picked up or re-signing, it's exciting. It's great.
Yeah.
I've worked hard. This is fantastic. Oh my gosh, they're giving me, call it $100,000 to go and play for Atlanta United. But you have to know exactly what that means. You have to know what that is doing to you, and that was my fascination with the Players Association. And it's important for players to know that.
Awesome. You mentioned agent, you mentioned representation. How was your experience throughout the course of your career with an agent? Did you have more than one professional working with you? When did you feel the need to have one, and how did the relationship go?
Yeah, so I started out without one, as I said. I signed that second contract. As I started to play a lot, as I knew I deserved more, and I felt kind of constrained in terms of what I could get, I hired a friend who worked in management and had lawyers working for him. He actually worked kind of in the music industry, but I wanted to get someone I trusted. I hired him. He did well for me, but the rules in MLS were so much that you kind of need someone with industry knowledge. And I signed with, I worked with my friend for a bit, and then I signed with one of the bigger agencies in the U.S. I worked with that agent for 7 or 8 years, and then I moved to a different agent within the same agency, and they negotiated my deals for the rest of my career.
Oh, that's good. And then was a positive race for somebody that came in and helped.
It is, but anyone will know that every player's going to feel undervalued, and everyone's going to feel like there could have been more, or maybe they left something on the table. I think the lesson is, and it's difficult as a young player, because the MLS loves to make you feel like you should just be happy to have the job, which in a sense is true, but in a sense is not, because they're making some good money off of you. But your agent works for you. You employ them, and I think the lesson is make sure that if you feel like you should get more, then you should talk to them about that and try and get it out of them.
Well, coming from Brazil, countless stories of Brazil being such a exporting market, right? So we have 13, 14-year-old players with agents, and often from a poor background, high education from parents, and bad situations do happen. I feel sad for good professionals, good intermediaries, good honest agents that are out there trying to help people try to help players to do what you're saying, to help you out in that situation. Okay, should I extend that option? Should I renegotiate the other way? And it's interesting also having that, you know, European and South American experience and background. It's difficult and hard to understand that who has your sportive rights within MLS is the entity, is not necessarily the club. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, I played with Clint Dempsey in New England, and Clint was exceptional, and he was performing in a way that meant that he was going to get sold. And when you get sold, it's not like the New England Revolution says, okay.
Here's your transfer fee.
Yeah, they don't. I think you went to Fulham, right? And it's not like the Revs called Fulham and said, okay, we value Clint at $10 million, and then they say, okay, we'll pay, and then the Revs get $10 million. The way MLS works as a single entity is that a portion of that money, well, all of the money comes into MLS. The transfer is negotiated mainly by MLS, and then the proceeds get divided up amongst all of the teams, and a portion comes to the host club. And so there are a lot of vested interests in how that's done. Miguel Almiron was another one. I mean, it was huge. It was a record outward transfer from Major League Soccer. I know that Atlanta United did a lot of the negotiating, but there are lots of parties involved, and it's not as straightforward as a lot of people think.
Do you feel that takes it takes the MLS to go for a model of acquiring more experienced players instead of that model of bringing youth players to be like a market that would be a stepping stone for an European club, or because cases like Miguel Almiron, I feel that we would have enough talent to happen more often. But now we're having the American players making a bigger impact in Europe, already being developed through the European system from the youth. So they're not even passing. We don't see Joe Reyna didn't play here, Pulisic didn't play here, Tyler Adams didn't play here. Not to the extent that MLS fans would know them and they would make an impact on a team here and then move overseas. How do you see the relationship between the guys that are making headlines in Europe and MLS not quite being a pathway for that?
Well, I think MLS in the last 10 or 12 years has tried to shift away from the
Beckhams and
the DP Galactico kind of Beckham, Cuauhtemoc Blanco, all of the superstars that they latched onto, and move into developing academies and incentivizing clubs to buy young and sell high, essentially. I think the biggest thing and the best thing that MLS has done has thrown resources at youth players. I don't know that they're doing it in the best way, but I think that youth soccer in general, a lot of people are fighting for a piece of the pie and trying to do it their own way. But as far as players going straight to Europe, I think there's always going to be a bit of everything. If you're good enough and your parents are plugged in enough to realize they can send you to Germany, then it might happen for you. But there's going to be a lot of kids who just do not have any means or any understanding of that, and they're going to develop here.
Sure. So we talked. We got off on a tangent here. We're gonna go back. We were moving from a tough time in Chicago with the Chicago Fire, and now we land in LA.
Yeah.
How did that go?
That was great. I went from 3 clubs that probably struggled to fight at the top of MLS in terms of financing and things like that, in Chicago, Colorado, and New England, and then I got to go to LA. And LA, for me, it was always a dream to play for the Galaxy.
Back to your native state.
Yeah, back to California.
Much better weather.
Yeah, the weather was great. The history of the club is immense, and I walked into a locker room with big time players, big time pros, and it was.
Who'd you have there as a teammate? It was.
Well,
And we're talking about 2014?
16.
2016.
16, yeah. So Steven Gerrard,
Mhm.
Robbie Keane, Ashley Cole, Landon Donovan, and then MLS legends, Robbie Rogers,
Mhm.
Mike McGee, Alan Gordon, Dan Kennedy. I mean, guys that you had played against for years and years, and then European guys that you'd watch for years and years and years, and then you got to play with them, and that was pretty special.
Any ego conflict? How is locker room environment with this many stars?
It was good. It was super competitive. I mean, I think that a lot of those players on the superstar spectrum were toward the end of their career. That was Steven Gerrard's last year playing. That was essentially Robbie Keane's last year playing. Ashley Cole continued to play. Landon Donovan came out of retirement
Mhm.
that year and then left at the end of the year. Bruce Arena took the national team job when Jurgen Klinsmann got fired. So a lot of people were it felt like they were on their way out, and I think it affected the year a little bit. I don't
Yep.
think we kind of performed
Performance-wise.
to our potential. But for me, it was a tough year because I had surgery in the off season and it took a long time to get back, and it was
You
really.
even had some time with the Tuesday, right?
I
In this
did.
rehab process.
Yeah, I had surgery in December of 2015, got traded in January of 16, and didn't really start playing until April or May. So it was supposed to take 6 weeks to recover. It took like 4 months. And so it was really tough. And that was, other than all of the good side of off the field with my family. My daughter was born,
Yeah.
and my wife loved living in LA, and my son was 2 and loved LA, and the team was great off the field and the beach, etc. It was a tough year on the field for me, just
Right.
recovering from injury and stuff.
I'll say that's the lowest point of the athlete, right? The injury, like the inability to do what you supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and that was really the first time I had experienced it in my career.
What happened?
I had groin surgery, so I had like an adductor tear and
Number one muscle group in soccer injuries.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what's pulling your leg every time
Yeah.
you kick the ball. So yeah, it was tough. Soft tissue injuries and surgery on muscles. You create a lot of scar tissue, and you say it's the hardest thing for an athlete, not being able to do what you do best or what you love to do. Scar tissue injuries. That one for me, it just kind of kept re-tearing and
Yeah.
re-injuring, and that's when it gets hard. Is when you feel like you're close to getting back and you're working back up to it, and then it kind of gets taken away from you again.
Well, we mentioned Gio Reyna here. He's unfortunately in this process, such a talented player, but back to back long injuries. So,
Yeah, and it's funny when you get them. Sometimes you just keep getting them. It's
Yeah.
tough.
And then your time with LA ended. Before we talk about Atlanta United, the segue here is that most likely, so Carlos Bocanegra took the technical director position here once they announced the franchise here in Atlanta. You guys shared locker room with the men's national team. So I want you to take us through the international cap. How did that go, and most likely that's when the relationship started there with Carlos, and then he picked up the phone and brought you here.
Yeah, I didn't have a ton of interaction with Carlos with the national team. I was mostly in January camps, which was made up of Major League Soccer players. But I did interact with Carlos for a few camps. And yeah, that was the first time I had met him, and we played together in a game and spent some time in a camp. I wouldn't say that, that was definitely the first time we met,
Yeah.
but he was Carlos Bocanegra, and I just still felt like I was a nobody.
Yeah.
But yeah, he took a job in Atlanta and was part of the team that brought me here.
And how did it first? I want you to go a little bit deeper on the international experience, like playing for the national team, and then we move on to building a new successful club in Atlanta.
Yeah, well, the national team was great. I mean, So the MLS offseason used to be extremely long, and the January camp was created to keep the best players, start to create a pool, but also keep them active and train them and kind of look at them and watch them. And I was fortunate enough to go to 3 straight January camps, and at the end of 3.5 week camp, you'd play a game.
Mm-hmm.
I played in that game for a few years, and then got called into camps here and there. My first national team game was against Chile, and that game was like, it went by in a flash. It was wild. But no, it was a special experience, and I feel really privileged to have gotten to that point.
Every year that I would come here, we would have more people playing, and more people watching, more people playing the video game, playing FIFA.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, there's definitely something going on. Once the franchise landed in Atlanta, I'm like, okay, this is going to be very successful, because the game is here with multiple pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we have the international communities, and we have folks that come from all over the country to establish themselves in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And then a team comes along. So how was the initial approach, the initial conversation? How was your experience starting the team, or being part of the start of the team? How did that go?
Well, it started long before I got here, in about August of 2016. So in August of the year with the Galaxy, my agent was like, what would you think about Atlanta? We liked living in LA so much,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd never really been to Atlanta. I came once for an Open Cup game. We played against the Silverbacks. And I knew they were going to be playing on turf, and I didn't want to play on turf, and I said, I don't know, I don't think so. And my agent was like, I think you should think about it. And so I kind of said no. It became clear that I wasn't going to be brought back by the Galaxy, and he came back to me again and said, I'm going to go back to Atlanta. I said, yeah, well, let's see what they say. I wouldn't say it was tough, but when I left LA and I talked it over with my wife, one thing I'll never forget, she was like, well, you've done everything else in the league except play for an expansion team.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really got to feel that, because like I said, there was nothing. And it was tough. We were living out of hotels, Argentinian coaching staff who bring their own culture and differences, and all the players who didn't speak English. And when you get traded to a team, all the players, you'd say 15 or so or 20 were there the year before, and the year before that, and the year before
And
that.
some of them you played against, and you started
Yeah.
kind of having
Yeah.
knowing the guys.
Right, but when I came here, it was like no one had ever worn the shirt before.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it brought us all closer, and it was an extremely unique experience. And I always tell the story. We played a preseason game in Chattanooga, and up until that point, the story was about all the tickets the team had sold and how great it was going to be. But you're living in your own preseason bubble.
Mm-hmm.
You're training twice a day, sometimes more. You're sleeping in hotels. You're not seeing fans ever. You don't even have your own facilities. And then we played in that game in Chattanooga, and all these people showed up, and it was like, well, maybe they were right. And then, we played that first game at Bobby Dodd, and it was like a rocket ship.
I was super stressed out. I had come from a youth game that I coached, so I was ready late. It was crazy busy outside. Like Bobby Dodd's was never built for that amount of volume of folks.
Yeah.
But at the end, we just got in, and it was an amazing experience. Fireworks in the end, like everything was just awesome. Because if somebody had said it through the negotiations, hey, we're building a championship team, you'd say, okay, it might take a few years.
Yeah. Well, there was so much about that staff, Tata Martino and his group that he brought. I would never have said, oh yeah, we're going to win it. Even going into that New York game, and like I said, we lost the game, but New York, Jesse Marsh, Red Bull, high press, just relentless pressure, make the field as small as possible,
Yep.
put you under, and force you into mistakes. Tata Martino, the opposite. Play from anywhere, pass it to the goalkeeper, play backwards, invite pressure, all of those things. And so going into that game, we honestly were like, we could win because we've got some good players, or we could lose 5-0 because we are taking massive risks. And we did end up losing, but the next game we beat Minnesota 5-1 in the snow, and that year we were pretty good. But yeah, I would have never thought that at that moment that it was going to turn into what it would turn into.
Yeah. And then you were able to get your second MLS Cup with Atlanta,
Yeah.
Campeones Cup,
Oh, yeah.
Lamar Hunt Cup,
Yeah, the Open Cup.
Open Cup. So everything that, besides CONCACAF Champions League, everything that's to win.
Yeah. No, it was great. I don't think we never got a chance to play in Champions League with Tata. I don't think we played until
I don't think so.
the following year. But yeah, 2018 was when we lost in the playoffs in 2017. I said then, like, it was almost like we got cut off in the middle of a conversation,
Yep.
And so when we came back in 2018, it was just we had everyone back. We added some players, and it was just we went for it. I remember
absolutely on fire. And then to heading to the end of our conversation and heading to the end of your career, how is that moment for a player? What comes to mind? Your body start telling you that it's time, because at the end you've completed 15, 16 seasons
16, yeah.
MLS. How is that process of finishing up your career?
Well, I was lucky, I was 37 and a half, I would have been 38 if I had signed another deal. So,
Did you have another deal signed?
No, not necessarily. I think I probably could have, but it would require us to move again, and we were just kind of looking at it as, are we really going to do it? But I just felt fortunate that I made it that far. If you asked, like you said, if you came to Atlanta and someone said you were going to win the championship, I would have said no. If you had asked any of my teammates in 2005 if I would have played 16 years, they would all laughed at you. So I felt fortunate, and a lot of players don't get to say when they end their career, and in a way I did. And so that was the fortunate part. I can also say that it doesn't make it any easier. Acknowledge the reality that it's going to end.
Yeah.
And come up with other interests, come up with other things, do more off the field, prepare yourself. Because I always felt like I kind of did, but you don't realize how much you actually should be doing. And because retirement hits you. It hits you hard. Yeah.
Well, you've been commentating games, and everything you do, it's on a high level and on a level of commitment that's why you've had the career that you've had.
Thank you.
So commentating is great. It's a pleasure to call you a colleague as a coach.
Yeah.
You're a U.S. soccer licensed coach, and doing your work with MPS. Is MPS?
Yeah, MPS data.
MPS
That's
data. Being a technical advisor there for them. So I feel that you're doing all things right until you find whichever path to be the best for you to continue. But this game needs you. This game needs athletes like you with that example and that history to inspire the young ones coming after you. And you paved the way for a lot of players to have a better career in the U.S.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and lots of players paved the way for me too, and lots of coaches. And the varsity coach was this guy's name is John McGardle, and he actually passed from COVID, and so he was indirectly like the driving force for me. Watching him, the demands he put on his players. He probably couldn't get away with half the stuff now.
That he used to do back then.
But it was nothing violent, but the expectations of his players, he would never let you slip an inch or even less. And that kind of competitive nature, that level of competition that is required to move through the levels and overcome adversity and setbacks and create sort of self-confidence and belief. I definitely saw and learned that first from him.
Awesome. Jeff, I cannot thank you enough for this opportunity to sit down here and talk to you about this amazing career. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you had a good time with this podcast, please follow us on social media. What is are you a social media?
I don't
You're
have
a TikToker?
I don't have any social media. No, I don't.
So we'll have all links and everything in the description. Thank you. And if you guys enjoyed it, please follow us, and we'll be back. All right, we just had an amazing conversation with Jeff Larentowicz, MLS legend here in the city of Atlanta. Please, if you liked, subscribe to our Nexty Sports channel. You can find us on YouTube at Nexty Sports, and you can find us also on Instagram at Nexty Sports. Okay, I appreciate your time, appreciate you listening. If you liked, please leave a comment, subscribe, click the bell here so you can get notifications once episodes go up. Okay, thank you so much. Y'all have a good night.